All right, welcome back to the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source. I am Eric Paul, and if you enjoy listening to the podcast, please visit us on Patreon. EPS podcast is on Patreon, so patreon.com/EPS podcast. I can be found on Instagram. I can be found on Facebook. I can be found pretty much anywhere, Twitter. Just look up for EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source. Today is a first for the show. I know the last episode was a first in that I got to talk to somebody directly involved with creating something. Today is a first in that I'm going to be talking to somebody, and we're going to kind of apply the questions of a primary source to their life. And so it's almost as like I have my friend up on a pedestal or on a stage, and we're all just like scientists looking at it. But that friend would be this is John Keller, and John Keller and I became very quick friends my first year of teaching on the eastern shore of Maryland, and seems like it was probably about 11 years ago. No, actually like 13, 14, 15 years ago maybe. And he is a person. Over the years that I got to know him, I found out that this is exactly the kind of person that if I'm going to talk about how the world around them, kind of shaped them, and then how they shaped the world around them, it's going to be John Keller. And so welcome to the EPS podcast, John. And so glad to have you here.
Paul. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So chef is your main title, correct? That if you were to be called that by most people, that's how most people know you, as chef.
Pretty much. But now I've been teaching culinary and catering on the side a little bit as sort of my second career. But I had an incredible career in top restaurants in the Northeast and France and Italy too. And I really just got to experience amazing things, meeting a lot of celebrities. And my career, as I pushed my way up the ladder with another friend of mine, as we bounced around, we were side by side to some of the most important events of the late 20th century.
Yeah, because you did a lot of your work and including currently in the greater Washington, D.C. area, right? So this is
that's right.
Kind of among the movers and shakers. I had a quick question about that, because you've have served some heads of state, correct? Like you've had in your dining areas very important people from around the world, and of course this country. I was watching, I don't know if you've seen there's a recent movie that came out called Spencer, which is about the last Christmas that Princess Diana spent with the royal family. And at the beginning of the movie, they show like the army bringing in all of the food for the kitchen staff, because it's so important that it stays. When you serve secretaries of state or diplomats from all around the world, is it similar kind of security like that?
Well, they run a background check on everybody that's going to touch the food, pretty much. And I mean, I don't think I guess they do their best. So there were several times that I've been really close. I worked at the Aspen Water Institute on the chess, which was a Marriott-run think tank that had FBI, CIA, the State Department, Secret Service, and they would have these meetings away from the Beltway to have these meetings in the country, and I would be serving them. So I was but little known to them, I'm such a student of history and I've seen so much, and I've been I've been around the big powers of the United States and Russia.
Oh my.
So it just sort of weird and accidentally. So I mean, I provided with something of a timeline, but from I've jumped around. My life has jumped around.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to get into that sort of thing, or you want to get into my real culinary thing. But
Well,
you're a
I
history
think
guy.
we could. I mean, so I guess where I'm going with this is that I could I'm going to go right down the same kind of lists that I do for anything, whether it's a movie or a TV show or a book. And in this case, it's your career. I mean, if we were say like, what material are you made from and how were you made? I mean, the podcast could go in a really, blue direction with, how you were made. But as far as your adult career, the materials that I gotta think that it has a lot to do with your, where you were on the timeline, like when you got of age to start working in kitchens and when you went to school. So are we talking like early 80s around there is when you started getting into?
Yeah, pretty much. I graduated high school in 82, and I went to Boston University in 83, and I pretty much graduated in 89.
And so we were talking about this before recording. So there was a number of things that, you kind of bounced around. What were some of the majors that you were interested in pursuing while at BU?
In the end, I have a degree in French language and literature. So I speak French, and I read centuries worth of French literature in the original and would write papers in French.
Oh my.
And so I really, it was very, very hard, and I'm a very slow reader. And through that so that was my major. I had a minor in Italian and a minor in art history. And Boston was a great place to be around high culture and low culture at the same time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I can imagine. And I was in and around Boston in that same time period too. I mean, you may have seen me in a stroller going by at one point and dropping my my melted ice cream at Faneuil Hall there. And you were there like, hey, that poor kid. But I guess like that, with a place like, so I'm thinking of where my mind is with all this is like, I almost feel like I'm a madman. I'm like going around like everything's a primary source. It's almost like we're all primary sources just floating around and sometimes colliding into each other. And you just happen, because Boston in the 80s was a product of so many things before it and so many things at that time. And then stick you in there because you're not from Boston originally, right? You're from Pennsylvania.
I grew up outside of Philly, and pretty much. And then I went to my high school was a Waldorf school, which was pretty radically left.
Yeah. Well, I know Waldorf schools, and those are also, that's something very 20th century, German, inspired and everything. And so you're almost like the opposite of Ben Franklin. You went Philly to Boston and instead of the other way around, and, brought to them there. So you go from high school to Boston, and in all of this, I can only imagine that the learning about French and, so immersive like that is that where the cuisine, is that where
it's part of it. My grandmother was an amazing cook. My grandmother was an insane, she was on Long Island. Her friends were Jewish and Italian, and she would go to the Washington, to the New York Times Sunday, where they had a meal of the week, and she would often make that meal that was made by like Craig Claiborne, like these early New York gods of culinary writing.
Mhm.
And she would like buy all the ingredients and make these things like that, which was beyond most. But she was like, she exposed me to like clams and gardens and things that like one of her most favorite expressions was like, it's the first of the season. Like, it's like, oh, like asparagus just came out. It's the first of the season. Let's go. And like, I was it just sparked my imagination so much that to like be under her. And she had this massive book that she would refer to and make these great meals out of. And I just thought it was something sort of like Merlin, like
Yeah.
going to this tome and kind of, and then grabbing these whole ingredients and turning it into this
Yeah.
magic brew.
That's amazing. And that's so fitting, because I remember when I was in graduate school and I took a class on American foodways, and we did a great study of the women who wrote The Joy of Cooking.
Yeah.
And then we also read about just cookbooks in general, and how cookbooks, even though, definitely by the 20th century, they're becoming mass produced, they're published and, across the country, and everybody's having that. You can find so much individualism with them, because people like your grandmother would put their own spin. The printed recipes there, but they realized that they didn't like that particular measurement, or they preferred to put a substitute in there, and so you would see little pencil marks. And then, considering how much and predominantly women in the mid 20th century were using the cookbooks, other life events are being recorded there as well, because they have like their favorite recipes that they're at. And then, Sally walked for the first time today, or this is the height of my kid on this particular day. So I definitely can see where that would be an inspiration to have that kind of presence. Where, I mean, nowadays when people want a recipe, they just go online and have to scroll down past all those different stories of stories, kind of like the one you just told, but they, just to get to the bottom of the recipes. It's not quite the same experience.
Not at all. And I think, there was really sort of the passing along of the good recipes, like, like a troubadour passing a song around, or, it would be passed through several hands, and then it would get good. And then you have it sort of. And then if it was worthy of her recipe box, then, you can find it and use it and it would work.
What would you say is your favorite recipe of all the ones that you learned from her?
Well, she was crazy for Christmas, and she did her Christmases like Dickens. Like, she would make plum pudding, and sometimes she would roast a duck or roast. And then she would just have this, like, and she wasn't even English. She was just like possessed or something. Like, and then, but that too. And I think she also would love, not necessarily recipes, it's just some of these things. Corn in the summer, soft shell crabs and tomatoes, I think, or they would have the soft shell clams, which are, they're, it just like, she would get the freshest, and she'd get some good bread, and she would make a broth, and she would sit and she would eat with such joy that I was like, there's something to this. I think there's something. Yeah. So that's my earliest influences. And I think when I went, and I always liked to cook through high school. And then when I got to Boston, sort of my money ran out, which is why it took me through so long to get school. But I was working full time, and I stumbled upon this job to be this assistant pastry chef at an Italian cafe called Il Dolce Momento, a sweet
Hmm.
moment, that made everything from scratch. And they made the bread for their sandwiches. They made gelato. They made salads. They made pastries. They made their own croissant dough from scratch. And it was just me, like as an apprentice under this guy who would just do everything correctly. No shortcuts.
Hmm.
Measured it out. This is the way it's made, and the results were always fantastic. And I mean, it wasn't like incredibly fine dining. It was just solid, made, excellent food. And I think that's where I really got inspired. I got inspired by those people who are just so passionate about the result of the tradition, the consistency, the joy that it gave people. I mean,
Yeah.
so there was that. And so I worked there for a long time. And having this French background, I told my brother that I really want to work in France. My brother was living in Boston too. We're
Hmm.
at a bar, we're hanging out, and I'm like, I go to him like, I really want to work in France. I don't have the money, but I bet you there's somebody out there that would pay me to go to France and cook. And
Uh-huh.
and I don't think I was I might have been slurring my words at the time, but I thought I looked him and he was like, well, let me think about this and let me work on it. And he found this woman, Anne Willen, an English lady who was giving up this scholarship kind of thing for an apprentice in France. And I applied for it and got it.
Oh, wow.
And incidentally, at El Momento, Julia Childs came in and would eat my croissants.
Oh, wow. That's actually where I come in on this, because as a kid, I loved cooking, fake cooking. I had the kitchen set and everything because of her. I would watch
Yeah,
PBS almost
definitely.
exclusively, and I would just love watching,
Yeah,
her. And it's almost exactly what you're saying. I think part of the reason I liked it so much is just the care to doing things right and to do the fundamentals. And I mean, if I was keeping a tally right now, I would say that we've probably mentioned between the two of us like a dozen different primary sources, things that
yeah,
are products of their times,
yeah.
from the restaurant to that scholarship to, Julia Child, just her being of a noticeable name, all the way through. And so you go to France,
So
and how long
yeah,
were you there?
4 months, and I did an apprenticeship, a formal apprenticeship called a stage in this 2 Michelin star restaurant in the Alps.
Oh, wow.
And it was, and luckily my French was good enough because everything was in French. So, and in the kitchen was ruled by the chef, who would basically scream out the orders and you had to respond in French to what he told you, that so to make sure that he heard you. Then instantly you have to take that food out and put it in front of you and then keep working through all of the other things.
Oh,
So
my
it's just
goodness.
like, and so I mean, it was such an old school hierarchy that waiters are second class citizens who aren't even allowed to step foot in the kitchen. Only the head waiter's hand is allowed in the kitchen,
Oh, my God.
handing the ticket to the chef. The chef reads it off like, and
Like a
he
sergeant major
says,
almost.
"Oh my gosh, we're rolling 3 covers. One has this, one have that back." But everybody, without having a paper trail like American chefs do.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy. And you had to remember it, right? You couldn't just
I have
like,
to remember it.
yeah.
You
Because
have
if
to
you're like,
remember it.
excuse
Yeah,
me, pardon,
yeah,
just,
yeah. You're, and this
and
guy had
that's,
this, he was a huge guy, and he would really bully people too. Like, he used to yell some really funny obscenities at people, and it was intimidating as hell, and it's the way it was. But I got through it. And
are you kind of glad that you got something like that as your first, like real apprenticeship experience, so that if something like that came out later on, it wouldn't have been
yeah,
so
yeah.
like hard hitting?
Once I got through that, I felt like I could do anything. I mean, it was really, really challenging. Like, they the chef put all the waiters up in a one room place. This is in the Alps, and they
Yeah.
gave you a World War II era bicycle, and you basically, like, you would you get out of that door in the morning, like, and then you would go, like, down the mountain on a rickety bike with cobblestone.
This needs to be made into a movie.
Yeah, and then you would work your butt off from 10 o'clock to after lunch service, and then you'd have a siesta break for 2 hours, 2.5 hours,
Mhm.
then back to work, and then you would work until the close of the restaurant, and then do it 6 days a week.
Oh my god.
So that's a split shift. And so it's really like, and I was thinking, like, what's incredible is you gain respect by working with the name of the chef. So I worked in Michel Bouvier's kitchen, and that means something to
Yeah.
French people. Like, he came from 3-star, and his place was 2-star. And if you can, now he has a really luxury place in the ski resort that is beyond reason. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So, but getting through his thing it was like, it was close as I'll ever come to the military.
Wow.
It was so hard. It was just like, but looking around, I always had there were always somebody. I was never at the bottom of the pack. I was always like, I was never like, and I mean, he would definitely weed people out, French, but he'd have people from all over the world come in as this intern free labor,
Mhm.
and there was some amazing people, Japanese people who had like insane knife skills, and his menu is French cooking is very cerebral. It's very, there's so many formulas, and like to get these perfect sauces, and
Mhm.
to get this combination of things to be, you brew them for a long time and pull out all the essence of it, and it's really insane. And then I'm leading to this because I went to Italy after this, and Italy is a whole different thing. It's like, so
So you
um,
went immediately from France to Italy?
but what I did was, after I completed that, it was the internship that I did was through the International Association of Culinary Professionals. And I contacted them and I said, I'm here in Europe. Can you just give me a contact in Italy that I can just meet, somebody who would just show me a little something, go. And so I got the name of this American who had a cooking school in Florence, and we've been long-term friends ever since. But I went and visited her, sort of under the pretext that she was going to teach me in her school, and we just became great friends immediately. And she showed me all around Florence, and she said, "Hey, before you leave, I got a friend in Chianti who needs a chef. You want to check it out?" And I was, absolutely. So I drive up. It was off season, and I drive up to Chianti, and I it was a small, beautiful, beautiful restaurant with a beautiful terrace overlooking the vineyards of Tuscany, and I was like, I'll take the job.
You're like, no, like,
Yeah. And I was like, that was really so. That was really, really so influential, and it wasn't where Italy was this really stressful situation. Like Italian was like soulful. I say like cerebral versus soulful. It's like, you basically get the best ingredients and get out of their way. Basically, you whatever's the peak of season, whatever the garden holds, that you wait for all these, and that really sparked what my grandmother said back then, that first of the season thing.
Yeah.
It would always be like, oh, next week is the mushroom harvest. This is the olive oil pressing. And then, you bounce from event to event, like truffles are this time. And then that's what your menu would be driven by, that next thing. So you just get those best ingredients, and you just kind of get out of its way, the best olive oil, and, the simplest ways, like to think of what Italian cooking, how did it come about? Like to me, it's like this Italian wife goes, go get us some dinner. So he goes down to throws a line in the beach of the Mediterranean somewhere, pulls out a couple of fish. He walks home. There's capers growing along the rocks, grabs a couple of those, walks up to his friend who's got lemons and olive oil. He gets a little distracted, a couple of glasses of wine. He's got the lemons, the capers, all growing right there, and makes his way home. Like, it's all from the Mediterranean.
I remember you telling me that, like, a lot of Americans, including my own perception of Italian food, is all tomato sauce. That's really not the whole cuisine, right? I mean, that's actually
not at all. It's not. And I had to totally relearn. I knew nothing. Like, I accepted this job as a chef because my grandmother cooked nice Italian food. I can too. Well, that's really Italian American. And Tuscany is known for its wild game. It's massive steak called the beefsteak Florentine. They're the bean eaters, the region that eats more beans than pasta, like, as part of their thing. So they have these.
There's a cloud over them all the time.
It's just a different thing. It's just like, I didn't know any of this, and like wild boar on my menu. There was wild boar, pheasant, pigeon, which is not the kind, like there was guinea hen, different fish from the Mediterranean, which aren't typical but my owner was from Naples, which is really fish. He brought some of his cuisine up to Tuscany. And like, this was amazing. This was just the finest food, and the atmosphere of the kitchen was like, there's the owners fighting over marital disputes or something and then they're drinking, and the nephew comes in and sticks his finger in my pot and says, "Whoa, that's so good," like
that would not be tolerated at the previous place.
Tolerated, yeah. And it was just this like whole different fun atmosphere.
I love it.
It was still so much work, like joyful work. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so funny because between the two places, both represent such a long evolution of food, and like you were saying, like everything's there, and it's had so much time to. And I think that I think it was just a couple of years ago that the late great Anthony Bourdain said that America's finally, like, just recently created its own cuisine, that we've spent the better part of the last 200 years not really having a uniquely American cuisine. and it hasn't really shown up. I mean, nowadays everybody is a foodie or a Food Network watcher, or willing to go out and try new things here in this country. But in the late 80s, early 90s, that still wasn't quite here yet, right? But you're over there in Europe, you're in Italy, and you're in France, and what you're experiencing is just like the tail end of hundreds of years of, if not longer, of them perfecting their craft. And it must have been a little bit humbling, maybe.
Was it humbling? It was humbling in a way, but it was more just the discovery, just like the next discovery, the next taste, the next thing. And it was like, I mean, I couldn't possibly assimilate the whole history, the whole culture of it. I mean, but I could focus on a dish, and I can work with the owner who knows what it's supposed to taste like, and I can bounce across ideas, and I can, but you really want to be able to recreate a lot of these classical dishes. And in America, they want to get these classic combinations and trick it out, this is my interpretation of tiramisu, but there is like the tiramisu is like the finest lady fingers, excellent espresso, in this really like beautiful cream, with maybe a little hint of some booze in there or something, with some cocoa on top. And all of those ingredients are just spot on that make it like, and that's the way I really sort of learned, like, so I've been influenced by that France and by Italian. And so then I did that for a full year in Italy as I was finishing up Boston and trying to move on. And I moved to Virginia, Charlottesville, after I came back and graduated from school to help my grandmother. And I worked at the Boar's Head Inn, which was a hotel and resort owned by the University of Virginia.
Okay.
And that was my first American experience. That it was the French that created the line system in the kitchen. This guy Escoffier in the early 20th century, who was a military guy, kind of said, enough is enough. Everybody's chaos. You are doing cold food. You are doing the vegetables. You are doing soups and stocks. You are doing the butchering and grilling. You are doing, and then do that. And then they bring the dishes together. And when I worked at the Boar's Head Inn, and the chef there had come from the Inn of Little Washington, which just got its 3 Michelin stars a few years ago. So it's one of the in the Northeast that has 3 Michelin stars.
Oh, wow.
So he came from that. And the amazing thing that he did, Ken Harnad was his name, was he would start everybody at the bottom of the line, no matter how experienced you were, and you were to work your way up, make sure you know it, and then move you on. If you had a lot of experience, he'd move you on quickly to saute and grill and maybe sous chef someday. But when you were there, you were responsible for creating all your dishes, and in the course of a week, you came up with your own special.
Oh, neat. Okay.
So there would be a cold special, a saute special, a grilled special, and a dessert special on top of it. So it depends on whatever, and you could order anything this world offers as long as you could sell it.
Okay.
So over the course of the week, we always had so much in our walk-ins. We would go in there and and then we would read books, and we would read
Mhm.
what's up, and then we would try and outdo each other. But then we would have a meeting with the chefs in the chef's office Thursday or something, and he would say, "That's a go, or not a go, do this to it," or something, and sort of have it perfected by Friday. And then the waiters would, with the cooks that made those, would go out for a tasting on Friday. The wait staff would taste everything. The
Okay.
people who made it would tell them everything that's in it. And they were encouraged to sell those specials. And
Mhm.
it was such a perfect system, because the wait staff had actually tasted the stuff, and they could
Yeah.
pull the memory, instead of what's the special today? It's like, I don't know, this, that. And, so it was this experience, and to have the trust and faith, yeah, do your job, but 15% of what you're going to do is creative. And that to me was so ideal. So it was a great experience there. And
Yeah.
I kind of talked to you about different times that I'd been around world leaders. We served Gorbachev and his wife.
Oh wow. In
They were
that
there.
famous visit when he came, what was that, 88, when he visited?
I wrote those dates. Um, um, I wrote those dates down. I kind of for you. 93.
Okay. Okay. So that's right. I was after, uh, but that's
Yeah.
still amazing. I mean, so I just want to
Yeah.
go back real quick to so you were mentioning about the military style. You said he was a military guy, um, or just military-esque.
Yeah. So there was this guy, Escoffier, who was the chef of the Ritz in London. Ritz was a French company, and
Mhm.
he, I was just teaching about this too in my class. So, and if you see the movie Ratatouille,
Yeah.
see there's a thousand details in there that are true to the cooking world. The kitchen in Ratatouille shows a piano range, a European kitchen setup, where the chefs are working in stations facing each other,
Mhm.
talking to each other. In American kitchens, it's a galley kitchen where it's one line and they work side by side.
I see.
So in Ratatouille, so he created this system where Escoffier, rank and file. There would be, you'd work your way up as an apprentice within that line position
Yeah.
until you were the best. And he invented the double-breasted shirt, that chef jacket, which has two purposes. It protects you from sharp knives and hot fire and grease,
Mhm.
but also what is the looks clean. So
I see.
you're looking for a clean kitchen, and
Right.
you could switch the double breast and have a cleaner looking front and go out and speak to people.
I
You
see.
know,
Because I just couldn't
you
help but
know,
think that, one of the things that happened as a result, and it seems like every time there's a major military engagement, like a war, World War One did this, and then World War Two did it again, where you come back with a culture that's derived from the military of efficiency and order and rank and things like that. Like we saw it in this country after World War Two, with so many
right,
servicemen going back to civilian life, working in offices, and being completely familiar with taking an order, carrying it out, and then reporting back and telling them what the outcome was of what you did, and how that just contributed so much to an efficient and very prosperous economy in the next 25 years after the Second World War in this country, and I'm imagining in most of the Western countries as well. But it's amazing. I think a lot of people wouldn't really necessarily think of its applications in the kitchen, in a commercial kitchen, but it makes perfect sense.
The GI Bill
Yeah.
brought men into the kitchen where they were since the beginning of time, it was women.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
That's a good point.
They had choices, and then that's where you started to get chefs' names and celebrity associated with them.
And I didn't know until recently that the Michelin star system is actually the same. That's the tire company, right? Michelin, that awards, because it's a travel guide. It started as a travel guide for all the different restaurants. And I really feel like fine dining is something that started in Europe. And when it came to this country, it was only for select few. But would you say that the time, so when you came back to the United States and were working in kitchens throughout the 90s, did you witness sort of that changing in this country as far as more and more people wanting to experience good food when they went out?
I think so. I mean, it was a lot of trends happened. There used to be, every town had this fancy restaurant, usually somewhat French, that had a dress code. And if you were a guy that didn't have a jacket, they'd have a jacket for you or something, and you'd go and eat. You know what I'm talking
about? Yeah. There's a Seinfeld episode like that with the Friars Club.
So,
right?
Yeah. So, and like that one, and then you feel like, and it was like, there'd be some table side service and some stuff. So I think that always was, but I think the difference is that, and if I could point at one thing, I think it would be, what's her name, who has Chez Panisse in Berkeley, California. For a long time, she wrote a letter to the White House going, it's time the chef of the White House is not French anymore, is American. It's time we have all of this bounty in America. They need the history, the regions, they need to be American. And she wrote a letter, and it changed everything. So it gave America a lot of standing. And actually, I had an interview.
Alice Waters.
Alice Waters, right?
Okay,
exactly.
Thank you,
amazingly influential person. And her restaurant, which was trained so many of the great chefs.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible legacy that she has.
When I teach, because I teach a pop culture course, and the way I do it is basically we go decade by decade, starting in the 70s, because we only have so much time, to the present. And I always present the students with a unit guide that has all of the different terms and people to know outside of pop culture, things that aren't really movies and TV shows and stuff like that. And I always start with the occupant of the White House during that era, because even if it's not on our minds all the time, the point that Alice Waters made is a correct one. I mean, it's a mansion. It's an executive mansion. It is meant to have that kind of pomp and circumstance to it with everything that goes on. But shouldn't it be because it's a trickle down kind of thing. It at the top comes, sort of like, they represent us. They are the, so wouldn't they at least have a chef, even if he's not making, mac and cheese all the time, which Thomas Jefferson did bring to the White House as, macaroni and cheese, but bad example, but, they're not always eating, just a ham sandwich, but it's still American cuisine. And I think I'm glad that you pointed that out. I love turning points, by the way. I love when you can pinpoint exactly the moment.
Right. And I think, so that is an essential moment. And I think that, and I had a job interview at the White House.
Oh, wow.
It was arranged, and I had an offer to work with the pastry chef at the White House, and I went in there and I spent basically the day hanging out with the pastry chef, and by then I was pretty good at chocolate and sugar work, which is kind of a rare skill.
Mhm.
But I actually I didn't take the job because it was so part-time,
Oh,
and like they would when an event came up, then you have to like work around the clock, and then maybe you wouldn't have it for a while. I mean, you almost had to be sort of independently wealthy to take that job.
just so
Like,
you could say you worked
and
there. Yeah.
so yeah, but and that was during the Clinton
I
era.
was gonna ask, yeah.
And so I did look out the back door and see him take off in a helicopter.
Oh,
But
neat.
that was neat. So, I've been so close to DC with my cooking that I've actually been, and my interests too. Like, um, so I had that interview, and I was working at the Boar's Head for a long time in Virginia.
Hmm.
Then I move on to Keswick. I could, but really just two luxury places that are just really beautiful, beautiful places, like high-end resort that were just, and the chefs were amazing, the crew was amazing, but it was a really high level. You really had to know the chemistry of food.
Hmm.
Your skills had to be really pretty refined, and we had a great crew in some of those places. We would work hard and play hard together. We'd go out
Yeah.
drinking, and I don't know what. One time we went skydiving together, like just we and then another time we went to a water park together, just like
It's the
tasty
chefs.
tasty what chefs like
You wear the
enjoying.
hat everywhere you go. Like, hey, look at this. Skydiving chefs.
So there was a couple of really so beautiful moments, like that I just they were so driven by like the people the best. But I've also, not to overly romanticize it, I've had the bad sides of the culinary world, and I've dealt with like getting stuck with some jobs I didn't want to be in,
Hmm.
just like alcoholism and drug abuse, and just some really sad situations. But I was around so much people, so much good and bad, and another thing that gets woven through my culinary career is refugees,
Okay.
because they
Working in kitchens.
working in
Or
kitchens, they would, when bad stuff went down in the world, these families would flee. And I worked with a guy from El Salvador years ago during the Contra thing, and he was like, one day in the locker room, he had his shirt off, and he had a through and through bullet wound
my God.
from his back through his thing. Because the story, the story was, they were basically rounding up all the young men in the town, and when they and throw them on the back of trucks, and he goes to the guy that like he doesn't speak or hear,
Yeah.
so they let him go, and then like
Oh, geez.
and then it gets better, because the guy loses a gambling debt and refuses to pay, so the guy turns him into that to them, and he says, "You're lying. You get back on that thing." And he gets on the back of the pickup, and he jumps off a moving, and they shoot him in the back through and through, and he
Oh my God.
survives. So
Wow.
I've been with somebody from the Rwanda thing, that their family, their
Yeah.
whole family was killed. I was there when they announced that. I I was there for Brazilian family because of the poverty. I've been through a guy from Senegal who was Muslim, who had just fleeing for a better
Yeah.
place to live. Yeah, incredibly well educated.
Why
Just
do you think
wonderful.
that cooking and kitchens are the landing place for so many people that are I wonder if there's like a compulsion to, express themselves in some way in real time, something you can't do with other forms of art, because cooking is an art. It's not,
Is
I mean, it's functional, but it's also,
it's also a universal language of sorts. Like good cooking is good cooking, no matter where you're from.
mhm.
And you have to apply your thinking, your smell, all your senses, your you have to be able to, but cooking is cooking, like Alice Waters pointed out, it doesn't have to all happen in France. And that's sort of been the difference. And you were sort of hinting at this too, that it's now people are recognizing America, but people are recognizing the world.
Yeah,
They're recognizing that, you know, that hot pot is amazing, that,
yeah.
that sushi is amazing, some of these dishes
Ramen.
from parts of the world, right, are amazing, like hand pulled ramen, like,
Yeah,
we've always, we always look at things through a Western lens, and, it's just a shame. But I think, the conversation was like the CIA, the CIA, Culinary Institute of America,
I was gonna say not that one.
the Culinary Institute of America. I mean, they were always so French, and a similar thing happened to them that Alice Waters sort of pointed out, that they were like, instead of teaching that classic cuisine, and I'm trained classically French, but instead of teaching that, they started teaching world, and like world flavors and world spices and world applications, and just having a generally new understanding of indigenous people and things, and refugees and immigration and what they bring.
Mhm.
It's
That's amazing. I mean, it's such a, I mean, just to go back to the theme of this program about primary sources, and it was my wife the other day who said, I mean, she didn't coin the term, but everybody has a story, from
yeah,
the guy you worked with from El Salvador to the,
yeah,
and we're all just kind of like floating around and just bumping into each other and having these, and when food comes into it, I mean, it's just, um,
right.
I can't think of anybody that's like, I don't like good food. I hate it. Like it's like a lot of times we'll eat crap. I took the road trip this summer, and I ended up gaining like at least 10 pounds just from eating crappy food, because I had to, because it was all fast food and stuff like that along the way. But man, when we got to a place where they were making, like, we stopped at a place in New Mexico, and it was legit New Mexican cuisine at like it was a diner. So they had diner food, but then the other whole menu was New Mexican food, and it was
Yeah.
handmade. You had to wait a little bit longer for it. And I'm like, okay, I don't care
Oh
if this is
no.
going to put us back a little bit, because like I'm here, it's authentic. I mean, I guess that's ultimately a celebration of a number of things in this country as far as our road networks are concerned. We have such reach. I mean, there's so much diverse flavors that come from all corners of the country, and we don't think twice about having, like, right now it seems like barbecue is the thing everywhere you go. Here in the Northeast, like, not even 10 years ago, there was a place in so I'm out in New Hampshire, and people were like, there's a barbecue place in such and such town that's incredible, it's so good. And people are like, barbecue in New Hampshire, how good could it be? It's not, from the South, it's not from Kansas City. now they're everywhere. Now it's all over the place. And to be honest, I had barbecue on our trip. We stopped at a place outside St. Louis. It was good, but the kind of stuff that I can have back here in New England tastes just fine too. And it has so much to do with our networks that we have, both physical and now, I mean, I'm talking to you as if you're in the next room, over the internet. So I really have to think that like the communication revolution that took place at that same time that you were working your way up to restaurants has a lot to do with making the world that much more connected through food too.
But you say that it's a recent thing, but I mean, it's when I was in college and outside of Cambridge, you've heard about that. What was that club we were just talking about?
Oh, the Middle East, yeah.
Middle East. Well, across from the Middle East, which the Middle East was famous for their alternate music, and they would have Greek and Middle Eastern food and great Turkish coffee.
Mm-hmm.
But across the street was the East Coast Grill. And the East Coast Grill, the chef, John Schlesinger, revolutionized barbecue in his little bar. And he would have these styles. He would be concocting these different sauces and Jamaican jerk seasonings and hot and sweet, and fruity and smoky. And he did it in this like hip bar that had just different styles of barbecue from different regions of the world, different regions of America, plus like a super fresh salad. And he really did amazing cocktails that had really good fruit juices and limes and stuff. And it was the little kitschy things. He'd have like little plastic mermaids or animals like sticking in his thing, and it was so sort of retro and fun. But Schlesinger's a big deal. He wrote the barbecue Bible as this after he sort of kind of wound that operation down, and that's sort of a real legit barbecue Bible. But
yeah,
being in Boston too exposed me to, I could skateboard with my friends down to Chinatown at 11 o'clock at night with a book that I was reading for college and grab Peking duck and some ramen and tea. And since I knew the secret passcode was pitcher of cold tea, please, and they'd give you beer after hours. So
does it still work?
Yeah, so you're sitting there, you're like, duck, like affordable, and it's beautiful, and you're like, and the whole menu is in Asian. I couldn't understand.
I guess I'll amend what I said before about barbecue being the new thing. I guess it's just like it seems that in recent years the urban experience is becoming suburban, that it's finding its way outside of because in especially throughout the 20th century and even the late 19th century, you could go to the cities were growing like crazy. The population was becoming far more diverse. Every single group from every part of the world was bringing their own food with them and their culture and everything like that. And it seems like now we're getting much more, because there's always been the chain restaurant version of everything in the suburbs and in the rural areas and stuff like that. But it seems like legit, authentic food is now finding its way out of the urban areas. That you're having so many more people, and it has so many reasons behind it. But I think ultimately it's just the access to it. I mean, because when you were bouncing around up and down the East Coast, it wasn't like a daunting thing to think, oh, I'll take a job 400 miles away. That's so much, 150 years ago, 400 miles is like, well, I'm never going to see you again.
I know.
Like, it's crazy. So I really appreciate you talking about this. And there's so many questions that I have as far as that template that I follow. But as it always tends to happen when I do these episodes, we end up hitting on all of them anyway, even if it's not in the actual order. So we talked about location, where it was, I mean, you seem to have been, if you were to kind of like give the cross sections of John Keller as far as, what has made you the culinary mind, and everything that you are, it's has everything to do with where and who and when you
Yeah,
were all these
absolutely.
places.
Absolutely.
It's,
And, and trying to get to the first of the season is the best, newest version of that thing that's been around forever. That is the primary source.
yeah,
That is the like to find that perfect wine, that perfect that and not just listen to somebody said this is the perfect thing, to go through your own journey with your own tastes, and for you, this is it. You found it. You've worked hard, you've tried the others, and this one really captures your imagination of the purity of it. And so like it's why yes, I worked in France, but Italy to me was just this more beautiful experience. It was both hard, both difficult situations, but they just wanted to get the best, most authentic things, and provide sustenance to the people they loved around them.
yeah,
And the philosophy that I've lived by is like, since I've been around so much history, so much political strife, so many, that time and time again, and if I had a choice, instead of building a wall, I'd build a longer table.
that's a good way of putting it, that
Right.
everybody gets to sit at it. And I mean, so much
Yep.
it's one of the things that I love about just, and this maybe is unnecessarily deep thinking or deep thoughts or something like this, but like I think about it sometimes. I'm like, ultimately, similar to you, I'm like, I just want to get to know people. I think that finding commonalities is the quickest way of doing that. And I've always found, and so we're both teachers, and you always have the tough kids, the students that give, they put up barriers. And I've always found talking food
Yeah.
breaks down so many barriers. Like you can get to know anybody through food. It's so, and it doesn't have to, I mean, I like talking junk food. I like talking about, pig out food and snacks, and, like whenever we go traveling anywhere, and, we want to find out like what is like the local, like,
Mhm.
like out in like Pittsburgh, it's the Primanti Brothers sandwich with the French fries and the coleslaw on it and everything like that. I need to have that. And
Yeah.
then when you chat with other people, it just drops all those barriers you might have, because everyone, like we said before, everyone likes food. Who doesn't
We
like
have
good food?
we have so many preconceived notions of about people and what they were like. So many like, this group of people is like that because that's what everybody's in. This they're like that, but they're not like that. You once you get into their world, into their lives, into their struggles, and they're just people trying, you know. And I like, my sous chef for pastry was from Senegal, and he he was so educated and so kind, and loved
Mhm.
his family, and I would have gotten to be near those people if it weren't for the culinary world.
I was
That's the
gonna
only way
say,
it could possibly have. How else could I have been around a guy from El Salvador who got shot? How else could I have been around a a, a blind gospel singing pot washer? How could I have been around crazy characters of the world, of different countries? It's the culinary world, because it's like, and another thing is like, a lot of Americans are kind of prima donnas. They don't think of that hard work. They don't consider, the kitchens are hard work,
Yeah.
standing on your feet.
It's always, it seems only kind of a recent thing. And again, I'll go back to Anthony Bourdain when, he wrote Kitchen Confidential and, talked about it at length and everything like that, of seeing just beyond that door that swings back and forth, the behind the scenes and what actually goes on there. And, chefs, even just writing things in Reader's Digest, 10 things you didn't know about being in a kitchen, or having nowadays with YouTube and videos and stuff like that. And like, this is where I eat my supper. And you see them in the back alleys, squatting down over a milk carton, just having a sandwich or something for their, and there's so much like high pressure, even in the most seemingly casual restaurants in the dining room. It's like high pressure situation in the back, because it's business, it's commerce, it's everybody's livelihood, and it's so important. So yeah, I mean, it only makes sense that it would cause people to, it's just now like Jacob Riis, the muckraking journalist of 120 years ago, wrote How the Other Half Lives. And I feel like for the culinary world, there's been more of that in the last couple of years, of like, what goes on the other side of that wall while you're having your food on this side and enjoying it. What is going on for those people's lives back there?
Check there, because there was a French movement called naturalism that was really early on in bringing that life of the destitute, the life of the, and there's a great book by George Orwell called Down and Out in London and Paris, that this guy takes a job in a hotel as a dishwasher and describes the really difficult life in the turn of the century, what it was like. And I mean, so I think we just kind of forget some of that stuff, but
yeah,
we're not taught some of that stuff. But I think there's a lot of pride in the working class. I mean, yeah. So
it's definitely, in recent just days, I've recognized just how, powerful social media can be. And the ability for people to record their lives and their situations and report back to the rest of us all the time. And a lot of, most times it really comes across, in ordinary everyday is very narcissistic, but it's, but there is another whole world to see, and everybody does have a story. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share, and it's just hitting the tip of the iceberg of your story, but as a novel go around at using a person's life as a primary source to tell us about, because if you'd grown up in any other time period, it might not have taken that direction at all. You might not have had a grandmother that had the ability to find all those ingredients and have all of the, the New York Times promoting different recipes to try and stuff like that. And that would not have been passed down to you at all. So, and like you said, an era where men in the kitchen were not a crazy idea. So that's incredible. Thank you so much for taking the time. And as listeners might hear, he has family needing him right now. So I'm gonna say goodbye. So thank you, John Keller, for joining me today on this episode of the EPS podcast, where everything, including people like John Keller, Chef John Keller, are primary sources. And we'll talk to you next time.